Thank you everybody for coming. My name is Leah Szemborski from your Employee Assistance Program, which I hope you're all familiar with. It's a free benefit to all Wood County employees and immediate family members. Provides confidential counseling, assessment, and referral. So if you're dealing with an issue at work, an issue at home, issue with your kid, issue with your spouse, whatever it may be, EAP is a good first call. We can see you right here in Wisconsin Rapids on A Street. We have a main office in Plover. And you can talk right on the phone with the counselor if you'd rather do that rather than make an appointment. So. Today we're talking about diversity, and this was a really fun presentation for me to put together, but I'm just going to warn you that if you want to know that Native Americans have longer pause times and the Hmong culture is more collectivist and they make decisions as a family unit rather than individuals, you're going to be disappointed. I'm not really going to talk about that stuff today. I learned all that in my master's program as I was getting my counseling degree, and I never really found it that useful, because that may be true for 90% of Native Americans, but it's probably not true for the one that you're going to be working with, and then what do you do with that, right? So today we're going to talk more about diversity in a couple different ways. We're going to talk about the political landscape a little bit, not that this is a political presentation at all, but what does the law say about dealing with diversity in the workplace and with your patients and clients? And then we're going to talk about ways to think about diversity and talk about it in real world settings. So I can do all the talking, but I think this is going to be a much richer informational session if we have some discussion about these things. So I really encourage you to participate and put your thoughts into the presentation. So what is diversity? We have to define it first, right? What is it? Any ideas?
Differences.
Differences, yeah. Anything else? So of course I Googled it and came up with diversity. It just means a variety or a range of things. Pretty simple definition, right? So what kinds of diversity do you have in your community or the people that you work with, clients or public, coworkers? What diversities do you see?
Age.
Age. Mm-hmm.
Gender.
Gender, yes.
Ability.
Ability. Mm-hmm. Opinions, yes, very diverse opinions, right? Good one.
Nationality.
Yeah, nationality. What else?
Experiences.
Experiences. Mm-hmm.
Race.
Education, race, yes.
Religion.
Religion, mm-hmm. Wood County has a high Amish population, right? Yeah. What else? Yeah, those are pretty good. Socioeconomic status, all those things, those are all diversities. So today, as we're talking about diversity, I pulled these objectives from the Teaching Tolerance website because I thought they were really good. But in 30 minutes, we're just going to hit the tip of the iceberg on this stuff. We could do a whole day seminar. So Teaching Tolerance said that good objectives for diversity training are to express comfort with people who are both similar to and different from you, accurately and respectfully describe how people are both similar to and different from each other, express curiosity about others and their experiences, and exchange ideas and beliefs in an open-minded way, and finally build empathy, respect, understanding, and connection. So do you think those are good objectives? Yeah, all right. So have you ever felt that you were afraid to talk about race because people might think you're racist? Or afraid to talk about disabilities because they might think you're prejudiced, or homosexuality because you seem like a bigot? Have you ever felt that? I felt that way, and I know there's sometimes a lot of questions that I wanted to ask, a lot of things that I wanted to know. I wanted to start some conversation, and I didn't, because I didn't want to be perceived as that person who's racist, right? And I think that a lot of us feel that way because we live in an age of political correctness, where we have to be careful about what we say because we don't want to offend anybody, especially in a professional setting, right? So I'm going to talk a little bit about the law. What does the law say about how we have to treat diversity and think about diversity in the workplace? And then we'll kind of pick up our discussion from there. So the Equal Opportunity Employment Commission, the EEOC, is the federal agency that enforces these workplace laws. Okay, and from their website, it says that harassment is unwelcome conduct that is based on race, color, religion, sex, including pregnancy, national origin, age 40 and older, disability, or genetic information. And harassment becomes unlawful when 1, enduring the offensive conduct becomes a condition of continued employment, or 2, the conduct is severe or pervasive enough to create a work environment that a reasonable person would consider intimidating, hostile, or abusive. And they put that reasonable person standard in there because some people are very sensitive, right? And they kind of fly off the handle about seemingly, comments and things that aren't meant to be offensive, but people get really upset by them. So the reasonable person standard says if we took a poll of 10 people, would the majority of them say, yeah, that's creating an offensive or hostile work environment. So an example might be if you have a workplace of all men and 1 woman, and she gets called pumpkin or darling or dear, and she says, please stop, I don't like that, and they continue to treat her that way, it's kind of patronizing, and it starts to affect her work, that might be considered harassment, something like that, right? So I could talk all day about this, but I just kind of wanted to bring it up. And then the Department of Workforce Development, the DWD, is the state institute that enforces the Wisconsin laws about this. And Wisconsin law is even bigger protections than the federal law. So harassment becomes illegal when an employer, supervisor, or coworker harasses a person because of their race, color, creed, ancestry, national origin, age 40 and up, disability, sex, arrest or conviction record, marital status, sexual orientation, or membership in the military reserve. So you'll notice that there are more categories added into the Wisconsin law. The Federal Civil Rights Act, so this talks more about your clients and the public that you serve. Civil Rights Act of '64 prohibits discrimination by places of public accommodation, which is what this is, right? Because you're serving the public, just like healthcare institutions, restaurants, stores, things like that. On the basis of race, color, religion, or national origin, and the Disabilities Act prohibits discrimination based on disability. So very similar to the other law. And Wisconsin statute prohibits it based on sex, race, color, creed, disability, sexual orientation, national origin, or ancestry. So it's interesting that sexual orientation is not protected by federal law, but it is protected by state law. So just kind of an interesting thing to note. So going back to, I'm afraid to talk about race because I might seem racist. Our objectives are to express comfort in working with different people, accurately and respectfully describe our differences, express curiosity, build empathy, respect, understanding, and connection. So we have to be able to talk about it, and we have to kind of find a way to talk about it where we're not scared to address it or bring it up or ask questions, but how we talk about it makes the difference. So going back a little bit to the law, if you're interested on some of the political things that are happening, I don't know if you've heard about like the baker who was sued because he wouldn't make the cake for the homosexual couple, right? I don't know if you guys picked up this handout. It's the right to refuse service, can a business refuse service to someone? And it explains the guidelines. So as a counselor, one of my questions was, wow, if that baker got sued because he wouldn't make the cake, what about me as a counselor? Because ethically, if I'm not competent in an area, then I should refer out to somebody else. So what if that's perceived as I'm being discriminatory or harassing? So for an example, if I had a person come to me and they were transgender and they wanted a sex change, let's say, well, I'm not comfortable working with that issue because I'm a heterosexual white female who's never had any training in this area. So certainly they could come to my office and I could offer support and empathy, but as far as really being able to help them, I'm kind of out of my element. So I would refer out, would that be perceived as discriminatory? So this article kind of answers that question for you if you've had some of those same questions of when is it considered discriminatory and when is it not, so you can look that over. So any questions so far? I know that's a very quick overview, but I just kind of wanted to put it out there if some of you had the same questions that I had. Okay. So how to talk about it? Be open, be curious, and be aware, especially aware of your own biases, because we all have biases, right? So our biases. Has anybody ever been to the Project Implicit website by Harvard University? No, it is a really fun and interesting website where you go on, you read the disclaimer, and you have to accept it before you can go in, and then you can take tests to see where your biases are. So you might do a test that determines whether you're more biased towards white people or black people, or women or men, or fat people or thin people, or Muslims or Hindus, or, I mean, it's just a lot of different kind of tests, I guess, to see where your biases lie. And before you get your results, it asks you a question that says, are you sure you really want your results? Because some people are pretty upset when they get the results, right? And these are all unconscious biases. We don't even realize that we're doing it. So we all have biases. So it's important to be aware, what are your biases and where did they come from? So who do you favor more than others? Who do you discriminate against more than others, whether you realize it or not? And so has anybody done like a bias test or been in some kind of workshop where you kind of talk through that stuff? It's really interesting. And I've led discussions on biases and stuff, and it's really fascinating when people start talking about their biases, what they are and where they come from. So if that's something you're interested in, certainly go to this website or call EAP. We'd be happy to kind of go through that with you. So in talking about it, be open and be curious. Ask questions, and it's okay to ask questions. Questions that you genuinely want to know. Questions that challenge your assumptions, because probably we all have some assumptions in some way or another. Questions that help to build rapport. And questions that demonstrate respect and enhance the dignity of the other person rather than degrade it. Because sometimes we can ask questions in kind of an innocent way that are really kind of passive-aggressive, right? So be careful of doing that. So you don't have to embrace values, beliefs, or attitudes that you don't agree with, because liberty is protected by the American Constitution. This is the land of the free, and we all have the right to believe what we want, generally to say what we want. But as a professional, you must remain respectful and avoid being patronizing, right? So if somebody's holding up a sign that says, frozen yogurt is way better than ice cream, I can respectfully disagree that ice cream is and always will be the better of the two, right? And that's okay. We can have that conversation, and we can have it respectfully. We don't have to be mean or degrading. Yes?
I have a question about being curious.
Yeah.
In training, I was told not to ask questions out of curiosity if it's outside of my professionalism.
That's a good point.
Could you explain that maybe a little bit? I get it, but I don't know how to exactly.
Sure. So really, if it's not relevant to the work that you're doing, it's really more for your personal edification than for the work and for the client. Is that what you mean?
Yeah.
Okay, so in our counseling field, we kind of have this standard that if it's not relevant if it's not going to help them, don't ask. So sometimes, we talk about self-disclosure, that when we're counseling with the client, we want to tell about your story. But the question to ask always before giving that information is this for my benefit or for the client's benefit? And if it's for my benefit, then I should not say it. If it's something that's going to help the client or maybe build rapport or let them know that they're not alone or something to the client's benefit, then it's okay to share that story, right? But the same thing with asking about, a person's diversity, whatever that may be, their disability, whatever. Is it something that's going to help you build rapport with them? Is it something that's going to be for their benefit, or is it just because you want to know? And if it's because you want to know, you should go home and Google it privately, right? Is that what you were getting at? Yeah, any questions about that?
Can you give an example?
Yeah, we're actually going to do some examples. So what about these questions? So what's the deal with you Amish not using buttons? Would that be a question that you could legitimately ask somebody in the Amish community? What do you think? Depends on the context, right? So what kind of context would this be okay?
If you were a seamstress, maybe?
You're a seamstress. Sure. Or if you had like a close kind of relationship with this particular client that you were working with, and maybe you were talking about the differences between Amish and American, or not that they're not Americans, you know what I mean, like, I don't even know how to say it, but talking about the differences, right? And you'd say, so tell me, I heard that you don't use buttons, is that true? I mean, that could be a legitimate question, but if this is your first meeting and you sit down and you say, hi, my name is Leah Szemborski, so I heard you guys don't wear buttons. Tell me about that. Probably inappropriate, right? I heard that Hmong people eat dog, is that true? Have you heard that? Would that be an okay question to ask?
Sure.
Sure, when?
Well, if I were,
Thing, you gotta know, is this dog?
well, if I were a hunter and I ate venison, I would ask, so we eat venison, I've heard that your culture eats dog.
Sure.
Is that true?
Sure. And you know what? A lot of Hmong people have heard this question, and
It's not true, is it?
well, and I don't know. I can't speak for the whole culture. But the answer, my friend Leah, she's the other Leah, she was working with a Hmong client. And this was a burning question on her mind. So it was for her benefit, not the client's, but she asked it. She said, I heard that. Is it true? And the person busted out laughing. And she goes, you know how many times I've heard that? She goes, I've heard it my whole life. And she goes, and here's the story on that. Hmong people have eaten dog, but it's really the poorest people who had to choose between eating this dog or starving to death. She goes, it's not like we're out there killing Fido to have supper tonight. She goes, generally speaking, no, but it has happened. And I was like, oh, that makes a lot of sense, right? So for her, that was a way to check her assumption. And so now she can kind of share that knowledge with people like me who didn't know that. So now, it's just kind of a way to build up some knowledge and experience. So this could be an appropriate question, but again, it depends on the context and the relationship that you have with the person. How about this one? I see you have a hearing aid. Can you hear me okay when I talk at this level?
Absolutely.
Yeah. I really can't think of any reason why that wouldn't be okay. So, being transgender and everything, what parts do you actually have?
No.
Probably not.
Probably not, right. Because again, it would be for your edification and not for their benefit. And I went to a training on LGBTQ issues. I can't remember what the name of it was called. And one of the people sitting in my group was transgender, and he said, you would not believe how many times I've been asked that question by complete strangers. Okay, and he found it very offensive. I mean, you wouldn't go up to a man and say, can you tell me how big your penis is? Right, that's pretty degrading private information. So probably not okay. So how about this one? Is it that time of the month? Right, as a woman, have you ever been asked that question? I know I have. Pretty offensive, right? But not to say that this area isn't something that you might talk with the client about. I know in counseling, I've had conversations with women about, are you aware of when that time of the month is coming and you start acting differently, So that in some context, a question around that area might not be wrong, but this question itself probably not in your best interest to ask. What is it like to live with bipolar disorder?
I think that's a legitimate question in context.
Why, how so? Does anybody else have? Yeah, go ahead.
I don't have bipolar, and if I needed to understand certain behaviors in the context of my job, I
Yeah.
know at least a glimpse of what it's like, just so they can explain it.
Yeah, exactly.
I'll never, well, maybe I might have it someday, but I'm just saying, like, I have not experienced it, so I don't know what it's like.
Right, to
Out of
enhance.
empathy, I need to have some sort of understanding of what that looks like.
Yes, great answer. Does anybody have a different thought about that? Are people pretty accepting of your biracial family? Yeah, maybe. What do you think about this question? Would you ask it?
I know I would ask it.
Yeah. Anybody else?
I don't think so, because I have a situation in my family, I've never been offended by it.
So it's generally not an offensive question, is what you're saying? Yeah. And generally speaking, it depends on how it's said and the context and everything, but generally people who have a biracial family have experienced some adversity because of it, is from what I understand. Like I said, my best friend Leah, she married a Mexican man and they have a brown daughter, and interviewing for daycares was an interesting thing because some people were fine with them bringing their brown daughter to the daycare as long as dad doesn't come pick her up. I mean, it was shocking that we live in this community and this stuff is still happening, but it truly is. And it kind of opened my eyes to, wow, I didn't realize this was still happening, but it is. So if that would help you to understand your client and support them, or just, build some rapport with them, certainly that could be an appropriate question. Why are Muslims terrorists?
No.
No. And what's wrong with the question?
Because not all Muslims are terrorists.
Right, it's very generalizing, kind of offensive for a person who is Muslim, who is not a terrorist, right? So not to say that that conversation can never take place in a certain context, but generally wording it this way would be pretty offensive. So offensive language. Some people intend to be offensive, and regardless of what your political views are, I'm pretty convinced that Donald Trump is trying to be offensive to get, media and people talking about him, and it's a strategy that seems to be working for him. But most people generally aren't trying to be offensive. Some people are offensive by accident. Have you ever heard the term, I got gypped? Yeah, I used to say that all the time as a kid growing up until I got older and I realized, oh, that's a slam against gypsies. I'm not going to say that anymore. Yeah. So sometimes we're offensive and we don't even mean to be offensive. But then some people aren't offensive. But because we live in such a politically correct society, they're accused of being offensive. So once I heard a friend saying to a Latina girl, "You're a caramel-covered angel." And somebody else heard it and said, "Whoa, that's offensive." And I'm like, what's offensive about that? That's kind of a nice thing to say. I mean, they do have brown skin. Why can't we just, bring that out in a positive light, right? So sometimes we're accused of being offensive when it doesn't necessarily have to be. So avoid being offensive, of course, right? Use care, be compassionate, suspend judgment, respect their experience. These are all the skills that you've, in human services have been trained to use anyway. And it's okay to talk and joke about differences in a positive way, right? So my friend, Leah, married a Efrain. He's Mexican. And I always joke, when he accomplishes something great, I say, "You're a Mexican," right? And he laughs. He likes that. He's proud of his heritage, and that's just kind of a fun thing that we joke about together. So that's a positive way versus saying, "You want to hear a Polak joke?" Right? Because Polak jokes are degrading to the Polish race. So it's okay to have those conversations in the proper context. You have to have that rapport build up before you bust something like that out, but it's okay. Any questions or comments about that? No? Okay. So what if you do offend someone? I once had a teacher, as I was getting my counseling degree, who posed the question, what if you lose rapport with somebody? What do you do? And we're like, oh, I don't know. And he said, just gain it back, right? Rapport comes and goes, but gain it back. So apologize. You might say, that wasn't my intent. I'm really sorry that that offended you. I didn't mean to. Affirm them. I really respect you. And then ask, what would be a better way to say that, if it's appropriate to ask that question, right? So just, most people are accepting of, okay, you didn't mean to, I'm going to let it go. Most people. And then the culture of power. Has anybody heard of this term before? So when a group of people accumulates more power than another group, the more powerful group creates the cultural norms, marginalizing everyone else. And as I read this, I'm like, oh yeah, that's pretty true. But then as I really thought about the environment that I live in, I realized how true it is. People can in some ways be in the culture of power and in some ways be marginalized, right? So how does that work? So look around. What pictures are on the walls in this building? Do we have any people of color on the walls, or have, traditions that don't come from white America that are displayed at Christmas time or whatever? I mean, looking around this particular environment, do you see what culture of power is reflected? Can anybody give an example in the building of something that reflects a certain culture? Just to give an example. No? So what food is available? Is it all, junk food, or are there other ethnicities kind of represented in the food that you eat or that's available to eat? What language is spoken or written? I know some efforts have been taken to include Braille maybe, or Spanish, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. What are standards of dress? When people walk in and maybe a sari, would they be stared at? Kind of like, what's going on with that person over there wearing that weird thing? Or is it okay? Is it okay to come dressed kind of in an alternative style? Right? Even the fact that I said alternative style kind of indicates what the culture of power is around here, right? How are decisions made? Is it kind of a collective decision making? Are people with differences, maybe a disability or different background, are they included in the decision making, or is it kind of a top-down decision making tree? So just thinking on that, based on your observations of this environment, what can you conclude about the culture of power and who is marginalized? And like I said, you can be part of the culture of power and also be marginalized. So, the fact that I'm white probably means that I'm in the culture of power. The fact that I'm a woman, maybe marginalized a little bit. I'm just throwing that out there, but I know that, just trying to indicate that you can be part of both. Does that make sense? Okay. So who is marginalized? And I know this is a really loaded question, but if somebody were to walk in here, would they feel comfortable if they had a different, something diverse about them? Would they feel comfortable in this building with this group of people? Can you think of?
Probably not.
Probably not. And what would be uncomfortable about it?
Not very diverse
Yeah.
in this.
In this population, right, exactly, yes. Just the fact that we don't have a lot of diversity here makes it difficult sometimes, right? Sometimes we're not even aware of it because we're just so used to the way it is. All right, so what have you and your organization done to include those who are not in the culture of power? And like I said, just translating things in different languages is a great example. What other ones do you have?
I run Positive Alternatives, and we, for the youth that reside with us, we have a diversity group that our staff runs for. So, we had all different types of populations and stuff like that at the group home. So we each week try to pull, this week we're going to focus on the Hmong heritage, and then we try to have at least one supper that is Hmong food.
Yeah.
So they can get a little bit of knowledge and background on that population. So that's what we do with the youth that reside with us.
I love that, that's awesome. What else do you do? Yeah.
The program I facilitate, we're collaborating with other tribes, so Native American tribes, so just to have that collaboration and work mutual clients. So if it's more family choice, they can choose if they want to have the primary worker of their tribe or of the county. You can kind of choose that based on their experience and their cultural level. So trying to work that out. So.
Awesome. Very cool. What else? It's hard to think, right? So what more could be done? What are some ideas that you have that we could be more inclusive?
Open-minded.
Yeah, be open-minded. Ask those questions. And it's hard to really articulate what I mean, but it's so easy to have assumptions and not even know that you have assumptions, right? Like when my friend was looking for daycare, and I just assumed that she would be able to go anywhere and it wouldn't be an issue. And when she talked about how hard that was for her and her family, I realized, wow, that was a huge assumption that I had, and I didn't even know that I had it. So just being open, looking for those opportunities to learn more, have conversations and discussions and experiences to open your mind, yeah. Anything
We
else?
started something kind of like that this morning. We have the option of notifying people by text message as a reminder of their court dates.
Oh, yes.
The balance of power is going to be the older generation. So I gave it to the young people in the office and said, I want signs that's going to attract their attention so that they fill out the form, because they need to give us a cell phone number and that kind of information in order to do it. So I think I kind of played into it a little bit.
Yes, definitely. Communicating with people the way they want to be communicated, that's a big one. Definitely. Any other ideas? All right. So what did you take from today? Is there anything that stood out to you or that you learned or that you might do a little differently?
I think just being more aware,
just looking around you, which this community is definitely not as culturalized as some.
Yes. That's a good way to put it, right? That is culturalized, yeah.
Because like at our church, we have 4 different kind of nationalities just at our church. And I know if I went to a church around here, I would not see that, you know?
Yeah. Great. What else?
Well, I'm never going to use the term, I got gypped. That was a new one for me. It didn't really occur to me.
Yeah. Taking a look at the language. And I mean, that was probably one of the least offensive ones that I grew up hearing and saying, right? And as I got older and went to college and realized what I was actually saying, I had some conversations with my parents about that. And they didn't know either, you know? Anything else? Any questions that you have about this? Yeah.
I'm not sure what to do with this one, but when people start a sentence or some conversation with, "I'm not racist, but," and then they say something, what does that mean for them, in your opinion? Does that mean that they are overly conscious of where they're going with it, or are they racist and they're trying to cover it up, or what do you think that's all about, I guess, in your profession?
Well, I guess it depends what the but is, and if it's intended to be offensive, then maybe they're in denial. But I think it's just that attitude of, if I talk about race, I'm going to be perceived as racist, but I want to talk about this. And that's kind of the same kind of fear I had. So I think that might be where it's coming from. What do you think?
I think it's a lot of it's comfort in bringing it up and not sure how to say it.
Yeah.
Some of it might be that people are actually racist and they're just saying it in order to kind of
Yeah.
sit and kind of soften it a little bit. But
Yeah.
I think probably in general, it's probably more of a fear of how to say it, because they don't want to be perceived that way. And they don't want to offend, but we are overly politically correct. That's even an oxymoron, I guess. But
Yeah.
I think that's a big part of it. So oversensitized, oversensitive, I should say. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, I say that with a grain of salt because, again, I'm coming at this as a white woman who's always kind of been in the culture of power. So I don't know what it feels like to be a Mexican in America where my primary language is Spanish, and maybe I would be more sensitive. But overall, I think well, again, here's my assumption. Most people mean the best, right? And they're not trying to be offensive if that's really where they're coming from. Yeah. Any other questions? All right. So remember, you can call EAP if you do have questions that you want to talk about privately or you want to learn more about this issue. It's something that I think is really fun and interesting, and I'm glad we had this conversation today. So thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.